Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dr. Medic channel. My name is Justin and today is November 8th, 2025, and unfortunately we have had another air ambulance crash, this one out of Tennessee with the Vanderbilt LifeFlight program. Much to discuss. Stick around for just a few moments and we'll get into it. Now, like I said, this accident involves Vanderbilt LifeFlight, which is an absolute top-notch hospital-based air ambulance program that operates out of Vanderbilt University Medical Center, as well as the Children's Hospital there at Vanderbilt. And they've been doing this since like the early 1980s. And I promise you, they are one of the more dynamic air ambulance services that I've probably ever seen, because in addition to their air fleet, they also have like 30 advanced life support ambulances. They've got critical care ambulances. And obviously, in addition to those, they fly several EC-145s, 4 or 5 EC-135s. And several years ago, they added a couple of H130s or EC-130s, specifically the T2 models. So like I said, Vanderbilt LifeFlight is a very well-established program that goes back a little over 40 years and has had an amazing safety record over the last 4 or 5 decades. Their current operator is Air Methods, whom they have partnered with for a very long time. However, just a few weeks ago, it was announced that that long-standing relationship between Vanderbilt University and Air Methods will soon be coming to an end, with Vanderbilt, I believe, actually purchasing all of their own new aircraft, possibly. But either way, they will then be switching over to Metro Aviation, who will operate those aircraft come sometime the beginning of 2026. All that being said, let's take a look at this particular aircraft, which in this case is this 2015 EC-130T2 or H130T2 with tail number November 107 Victor uniform, made by Airbus Helicopters, formerly Eurocopter Helicopters, and is owned and operated, like I said, by Air Methods. Now, this is a single engine, single pilot airframe, which is a little unique in the way that this particular helicopter is set up, because the pilot actually sits over on the front left, which is a little unique for single pilot operations. But this aircraft is very commonly used in the helicopter EMS world by many different operators across the country. But in all honesty, this aircraft is not a stranger to accidents, as there have been plenty of stories and incidents on this very channel related to an EC-130. Most recently, the attempted auto-rotation into the middle of a highway in California, which ultimately caused a single fatality with the flight nurse for Reach Air Ambulance. So let's take a look at the accident flight. And when we jump over here, we get into the ADS-B data, you can see that the last couple days, this base stays pretty busy. You can see them kind of flying all in and out of Gallatin, Tennessee, which is just north of Nashville, Tennessee. And you can see how busy they are, flying patients back and forth from different hospitals and different scenes and getting them where they need to be. They're a pretty busy base. But earlier today, you can see right here at about 1:33 p.m. local time there in Tennessee, they take off. Looks like they're either headed to a call or a PR event, doesn't matter, but they were headed south of their base, and you can see them take off right here. And you can see here that they start heading south and cruising at about 90, 91, 94 knots, which is, perfectly normal for that aircraft. And they eventually climb up to about 3,300, 3,400 feet MSL here, which in this area, I believe Gallatin is about 550 feet above sea level. So, they're probably flying at about 27, 28, 2,900 feet off the ground, which is great. It's giving them a little bit of buffer if something happens, and they can enter an auto rotation if they need to. It's great that they're not cruising along at 300 feet or 500 feet, which gives them no room for error. It just seems like they're doing everything right here. And then just about 5 minutes after they took off, here at 1:38 p.m., you can see that they turn right and they actually start to climb a little bit. And presumably, it looks like they start trying to return back to their base. Now, another very important data point here that we got to look at, though, is their speed. And you can see that it drastically increases by 30 or 40 knots, which is a big deal. But somewhere right about here in this area, you can see that the plan to return to base is, unfortunately, obviously it's not going to come to fruition. And there is a nice sort of smooth right turn here where it kind of looks like they're entering an auto rotation, doesn't it? I mean, you can kind of look here that, because you can see that it kind of looks like a controlled right-hand turn, but you can see that their descent rate is extremely high. Obviously, like, a regular air ambulance controlled landing might be 200 or 300 feet per minute. And these guys are it's kind of hard to tell by the data you see right here, but it looks like they're descending somewhere around 2,000, 3,000 feet per minute. The data is a little bit inconsistent here. It's kind of going back and forth, but either way, it's evident that they are going down, and they are going down fast. And they eventually do go down, and you can see that they impacted here in this field, and the helicopter rolled over here on its side as they crashed into this field. And unfortunately, the flight nurse was killed in this accident. Now, kind of a silver lining here is that this was a T2 model, just like that aircraft that landed out there in California in the middle of the highway. This aircraft, that because it's a T2 model, would have come from the factory with a crash-resistant fuel system, and not just a fuel tank, a fuel system. The valves, the hoses, everything is crash resistant, which presumably very well could have played a role here in preventing a post-impact fire. Now, this is important because, like I said, there was this single fatality here where the flight nurse did not survive this accident, but the flight paramedic and the pilot, from what I understand, both survived the immediate aftermath of this accident. Now, I'm just obviously heartbroken that the flight nurse passed away in this accident, but like I said, the flight paramedic and the pilot, they actually survived. And from what I understand, both of them, were flown as trauma alerts by other helicopters. And I believe that local Air Evac Life Team air ambulances actually picked up both of these patients separately and transported both of them as critical patients back to a trauma center where they are, trying to recover right now. Obviously, this accident just happened a few hours ago, and it's typically pretty difficult to determine what would have happened with something like this. Was this an engine failure? Probably not, because they probably would have gone down right away. It would have been more of an immediate thing. They had time to turn around. They increased in speed. They increased in altitude a little bit as well. So I don't really think that happened. I mean, could that have happened? I suppose that could have happened. But in this case, I think the investigation is going to probably go somewhere else. Now, based on the information that I have, I believe that right here at about 19:38 and 13 seconds Zulu time, which is 1:38 local time there in Tennessee, when this aircraft made this right-hand turn, I believe that there's a high likelihood or a high possibility that this pilot was having a medical emergency, or possibly to some level could have become incapacitated during this flight and was trying to get back home. Now, before I say more about that, we can also look at it here overlaid onto the Google Maps, and you can see here where they increase in speed, they even increase in altitude, and then just, going down fast, and they're quickly trying to put this helicopter on the ground. Now, like I said, I'm not going to say that it's 100% fact, and it's just my opinion, but I believe that in this particular incident, this pilot became incapacitated to some level. I don't think that he, keeled over and died, because he's still alive right now, at least as of this recording. And I believe that there could have been some type of medical emergency or some type of incapacitation for this pilot. Now, in the United States, the overwhelming majority of air ambulances are single pilot and single engine. And up until just a few years ago, there really wasn't that much of an opportunity to have any type of training for pilot incapacitation, because really in those types of aircraft, which typically or historically, they did not have an autopilot system. If a pilot became incapacitated in those aircraft, everything would have happened so quickly, and the situation would just deteriorate so quickly that there's nothing that any med crew member would have been able to do on those aircraft if a pilot became incapacitated. However, over the last 5-10 years ago on aircraft like Bell 206s, 407s, A-Star 350s, EC-130s, so many of these operators, which is a great thing, have invested millions and millions and millions of dollars into installing and training on these, mostly these Helisas Genesis autopilot systems on these single pilot, single engine aircraft that now operators and programs, because they have that Genesis Helisas system, have actually discovered that you can do a little bit of training on the med crew on different ways to react to different levels of pilot incapacitation, whether the pilot is under the influence or drunk, which, as we've seen on this channel, is not unheard of. Okay, there's been more than one instance of that happening. Or maybe the pilot is just slow to respond or is just having some type of minor emergency, kind of being, one level of pilot incapacitation. Or another level could be where the pilot completely passes out or completely goes unresponsive while flying the aircraft. That would kind of be a different level. But either way, training for these types of situations does now exist. And I know that Vanderbilt University does have a successful or some version of a successful pilot incapacitation training program within their organization. Now, if a pilot becomes incapacitated in an aircraft such as an EC-145 or the 135, which are a couple of the other helicopters that Vanderbilt has in their fleet, and a medical crew member happens to be sitting up front to the left of the pilot, then there are a lot of good things that med crew can do to assist. There is a high likelihood that you could have a positive outcome if a pilot did become incapacitated to some level, because that crew member is sitting up front where the controls are, where the radios are, where the autopilot is, all of that. But on an EC-130, there are no other front seats other than where the pilot is sitting. And in addition, like I said, the pilot is sitting up front and to the left, which is more difficult to get to, mostly because the collective for the pilot is also to the pilot's left. And again, is just another thing that is difficult to get to. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible to have a pilot incapacitation situation turn out successful in an EC-130, because I think people should do that training. I'm just saying that it would probably be more difficult. And in this case, like I said, I believe that this pilot may have had a medical emergency or became incapacitated. And in this case, that may have escalated to some level later on, that this aircraft had to descend so quickly and to be put on the ground. Now, if that actually is the case, if this pilot did become incapacitated, then it is very possible that some level of pilot incapacitation intervention may have taken place on this flight. But either way, since there was a fatality in this accident, the NTSB is going to do a very in-depth investigation, and we'll probably get a preliminary report, somewhere around 3 to 6 weeks from now or something like that. And you can probably expect a final report, probably 2 years from now is typically what has been happening for air ambulances. But since there are survivors of this accident, I do believe that the NTSB will be able to determine the cause of this accident probably a little bit quicker than they would if there were no survivors or something like that. But the last thing that I will say about that, all of this is that I have visited with many programs around the country, and some of these programs I have seen some serious in-depth pilot incapacitation training programs. It blows your mind how in-depth some of these go. With some of them even getting to the point where the med crew member that's sitting up front actually has the ability to control the aircraft with a collective and a cyclic if it happens to be installed. And actually getting the aircraft down to just a few feet above the ground with an autopilot system, and then being at an airport and possibly having air traffic control help them, all of that good stuff. But either way, like I said, there's lots of different levels of pilot incapacitation training programs that exist. And as I've gone around the country, I've actually heard some naysayers, man, and I've heard some people state that these training programs are a waste of time or they're not realistic. But if that happened today, it wouldn't be the first time that a pilot was incapacitated in an air ambulance helicopter, single pilot, and was assisted by one of the med crew members in some one way, shape, or another, and was able to somehow get the aircraft on the ground to the point that there was at least somebody who survived the crash. And it appears that very well may have happened today to some extent. So what do we take away from all this? That training is important. Trying new things is important. Thinking outside the box is important. Pilot and capacitation training programs are important, and I like them. Maybe that training played a role in this accident today by Vanderbilt, and maybe it didn't. But either way, I feel that these training programs are a good thing, and more research and development should definitely be invested into these training programs as it moves our industry forward, and it can only make us safer. Either way, I am sad and I am heartbroken for the Vanderbilt LifeFlight family and the family and friends of the fallen flight nurse. I hope for a healthy and speedy recovery of both the flight paramedic and the pilot. The entire Vanderbilt family will be hurting tonight, and probably for a long time, and for some people, maybe forever. So that hurts me. But to all the other flight crews across the country and across the world, y'all stay safe and keep doing amazing things.